But things were going good at this point, and here's what started happening. I started realizing what was coming together to make a career happen, to make my life different. And here's what it was. I was harnessing all the rejection that I was getting because nothing great was happening the first time. I was turned down for everything. I mean, you got to understand. I mean, I got good things going on at this point. But Joan and Cher didn't want to work with me because I had a southern accent. And after I worked with Joan and Cher, you know, Garth and Kenny and Randy didn't want to work with me because I wasn't a country comedian. I was a pop comedian. And the people on the college market said, well, you'd never be popular here because you're clean. And the people on the cruise ship said, well, you'll never work here because you're too young. And the people in Las Vegas said, you don't work here because you don't do jokes. What do? You just tell stories. You're just talking. You don't really do anything in particular. And then all this stuff that I'd been turned down for, everything started happening. And I understood that I wasn't really that great. My material wasn't really that funny. It wasn't really that inspiring and was barely interesting. I was just the last man standing. I never would leave them alone. What is it in our lives that's getting tough? And what is it in our life that if we just take one more step, if we just slog through the mud one more mile, what is it in our lives that could change the world? There are things that we all remember from our earliest childhood. There are lullabies for some people. Some people can walk into a room and smell something and be taken back to their childhood. When you hear a sound, a touch. For me, it was a walk in the woods with my dad. I remember being 6 years old and walking through the South Alabama woods, and it was a horrible drought had swept the state. Everything was burning up and dying. And I mirrored my father as he walked through a dried up creek bed, and I was stepping in his steps and hearing the crunch, crunch, crunch of the sticks and the rocks and the leaves. And I saw my dad reach up and grab leaves from a tree and crumble them, and seeing the dust fall out of his hands and watching him sigh. Everything was dying, it was drying up, it was leaving. We walked down to the beaver pond where my family would go on picnics, and it was dried, cracked mud with a pool of stagnant water in the middle, and the beavers lodged their home out on dry land. As we kicked around the edge, I heard my dad sigh. And then something happened that I'll never forget. The temperature dropped just like that. 20 degrees in less than 10 seconds, and a wind blew through the trees that turned the leaves over, and it blew harder and harder, and then thunder started, and then lightning cracked, and then sheets of rain, silver sheets of rain, sideways through the trees like I'd never seen before. And with the lightning and thunder, I'm a little kid. It scared me to death. I've never been that close to thunder and lightning before or since. It was around us. It was unbelievable. I'm crying. I'm screaming. My dad grabbed me by the waist, started running through the woods. But I'm kicking so hard. I know you're not supposed to get under a tree in a lightning storm, but I'm sure my dad felt like he had no choice. And he got under a bush, and in the rain and the lightning and the thunder, and he put me in his lap, and he put his arms around me, and he put his head down close to mine, and he hugged me, and over he kept whispering in my ear, calm down, you're going to be fine. I'm here with you. I would never let anything happen to you. It's not going to be long now. You hang on. We're together. Things are going to be fine. It won't be long now. And soon the rain stopped and the wind died down and the thunder and the lightning moved off. And my dad stood me up and said, take a deep breath. And I took that breath that little kids take after they cry. He said, take another one, son. And another one. And he dried my tears and pushed my hair back on my head and said, come on, follow me. And we walked down to the beaver pond again, this time beside the creek that had already started to flow. And as we neared the pond, my dad said, look, look. And we looked back, and there were 3 deer that ran to the creek. A couple of them jumped over. One stopped and drank and followed the others on. When we got down to the pond, the water in the creek was already swirling around, filling the pond back up. And my daddy looked at me and said, you were scared back there, weren't you? And I looked down and I said, yes, sir. And he lifted my chin. He said, don't duck your head. It's okay to be scared. I was scared too. And I looked up at him, and I remember thinking, my daddy was scared? My big, strong daddy? I said, you really were? He said, I really was. He said, how do you think the deer felt? All alone, out in the woods, in the open like that. They were scared, don't you think? They were scared. I said, yes, sir, they were. He said, what about the beavers in their home with their babies? I bet they were scared. Don't you think they were scared? And I said, yes, sir, they were. They were scared. He said, and what about the little animals, the squirrels and the rabbits and birds? How did they feel when that lightning struck and the thunder was so loud? How did they feel? I said, they were scared. He said, but look around. Look what's happened now. The creek is providing water for the deer to drink that wasn't there before. And the creek is going to fill up the pond now for the beavers so that they can spend the winter in their home with their babies, just like they planned. The rain washed the grass and the leaves. It's providing clean food for the squirrels and the rabbits, and the wet ground has worms coming up on it, feeding the birds. What looked like the worst thing that could have ever happened for any of us turned out to be the best thing that could have ever happened for all of us. It was a storm of perfection. And I never will forget those words. A storm of perfection. Something that looks like the worst, but turns out to be the best. Something that looks like a tragedy, but turns out to be a gift. And I remember changing my view of tough times at that point. And it's been something that has propelled my life in a different direction ever since. To realize that the things that happen sometimes happen for a reason. To mold us, to make us, to shape us, to fire us, to get us stronger, to get us ready for the success in the future. I remember the story I heard when I was a little boy about Daniel in the lion's den. And that's all we heard about Daniel in the lion's den and how Daniel was saved from the lion's den. And I was an adult before I realized that Daniel was not saved from the lion's den. Daniel was saved in the lion's den. He was allowed to go through it because it was good for Daniel. It made him stronger. It made him ready to become the leader he became later in his life. So I made it a personal mission to start asking successful people about their stories of rejection. Ask them their stories of hardship and heartache. What happened to you before you became successful? How were you before you are what you're now? What were you thinking? What happened to you when you were like me? And I heard some amazing stories. They wrote them to me in letter form, put them in a book. And I still think of these every day. Sometimes I get out these books and read them myself, to read the letters. I want to ask you real quickly tonight, what is it in your own life that compares to what some of these people have gone through? And how would you react in their situation? Would you hang in there long enough? I remember thinking, man, I'm reading books about successful people. I want to read some books about some of these people that didn't have all these good things happen to them at the end. But then I remember, nobody writes books about people who quit. There weren't any books to read. What would you do? How would you react if you were a high school football player and your dream was to play in the NFL? But everybody thought that was crazy, because you weren't even offered a college scholarship. So you went and walked on at the university of your choice and didn't even start until your junior year. And that was a fluke because the guy ahead of you got hurt. And you went in and you did well. And you let some people know about your dream of playing in the NFL. And they thought you were crazy. But you were drafted in the final round of the NFL draft. When you got to camp, they gave you number 42. They didn't give you a quarterback's number, because they said, you're not going to be around anyway. How would you react in those situations, in the face of those charges and in the face of that kind of discouragement? Would you quit? Or would you hang in there like Bart Starr did and win the Most Valuable Player award in the first 2 Super Bowls? What if you were a young singer and you had a dream to become the singer that you knew you could be, but you were turned down by every major recording label in America? And they told you, sorry, son, but you sing through your nose. Would you hang in there like Randy Travis did? What if your military career was derailed time after time after time, and every time they sent you somewhere, it was not where you felt you should be sent? It was not what you deserved. It was not the place you would have chosen. And at the age of 40, you almost quit the military because you were so discouraged at the postings and the lack of advancement. But your dream, your vision for your life was to serve the country and to help your fellow man in the military. Would you be able to hang in there like General Schwarzkopf did? What if you wrote a book and nobody liked the book? The publishers wouldn't publish it You had to publish the first edition yourself. And then when you published it, nobody wanted to read it. And the people who did read it hated it. The critics hated it, and your peers hated it, and your peers hated you for writing it. Would you quit? Or would you hang in there and let time take care of it, like Norman Vincent Peale did when he wrote The Power of Positive Thinking? So what's going on in your life right now? Are there situations that are challenges, and how are you going to view them? I'm sure there are storms of rejection, but there are also storms of perfection, things that are given to us to mold us, to make us, to shape us, to get us ready for the success in our future, with our families, with our businesses, with our personal lives. All I want to do very quickly is encourage you. If you're having a tough time in business, personally, you're in a great place. Are you having troubles? It may be a blessing. I used to think if this is the one common denominator between successful people, then holy cow, problems, if that's a precursor to success, then I guess I should be grateful for problems. If that's really the deal, maybe I should pray for problems. Never had to do that. But just think, are you having problems? Congratulations. Big ones? Good, learn from them. You're not having problems at all? Maybe you're being ignored.